Hello, this is Danny from CG Dreams. In this video review we're going to be looking at Ornatrix for Cinema 4D. Ornatrix, made by Ephia, is a hair, fur and feathers plugin primarily made for 3ds Max and then Maya, and now has been available for Cinema 4D for around about 2 years, in which we are currently at version 2, although this reflects closer to the version 7 of 3ds Max for its feature set. Just as native inbuilt hair solutions are available for Maya and 3ds Max, many have found good reasons to use Ornatrix over those inbuilt solutions. This is also the case with Cinema 4D. It has also got a very robust hair system, and today we're going to be looking at why you may want to use Ornatrix over Cinema 4D. Simplicity often comes with limitations, and likewise complexity makes things less intuitive and comes with a higher learning curve. It's very hard to strike that balance, yet I feel Ephia have done just that. Ornatrix is a modular hair system that works off the basis of order of operation. This means that you can add elements that control the style of the hair, such as clump or frizz, as a separate component, in which in Ornatrix they're called operators. These operators, when combined together, are regarded as an operator stack, in which you can stack multiple operators in almost any order you wish. The order in which you put them will of course affect the outcome. This may at first appear to open up unwanted complexity, but in fact once you understand the basics of the order of operation, it's rather easy to see where the power starts to show. Due to its modular nature, you're not limited to just one operator within the stack. For instance, you may want to have multiple clumps or levels of frizz to affect groups of hair in different ways. This means that you can rename each operator so at a glance you can understand its purpose within that stack. By comparison, many of these operators are found within Cinema 4D's hair material. They are listed in a set linear order and only one of each are available. This means, for instance, you only get one pass to apply, say, frizz or clumps. The basic order of operation works from the top down in the Object Manager. When you add hair, a basic stack is added, containing some essential operators. At the top of the stack we see a furball object with some operators as a child to it. The first one is called Guides for Mesh. This contains settings equivalent to Cinema 4D's Hair Object Guides tab, but Ornatrix contains more options and displays them in a more pleasing and visual way, such as the guides distribution types. The next in the stack is the Edit Guides. Within this single operator contains all the features of what Cinema 4D's own hair system has split up into 5 separate palettes of tools. Because they're split up like this, it's essential that you make up a custom palette or a layout so they're easily accessible. The Edit Guides contains everything within 2 hair modes, 2 selection types and a brush mode. As a mode is selected, the parameters are shown for that mode, keeping things relevant to what you need to see. This operator will give you all you need to get the initial style and shape in place. The next operator is the Hair from Guides. This operator is responsible for the generation of hair from the guides. This is equivalent to Cinema 4D's own hair object in the Hair tab, but goes much further, and this is where the first significant differences are found between Cinema 4D's hair system and the Ornatrix hair system. Think of the guides as providing a general direction of flow and volume, and the hair generation responsible for interpreting that guidance. The hair generation can't understand your goals for how you expect the hair to look. It does not have our intelligence, so it relies on its interpolation methods to how it follows these guides. And as such, Ornatrix certainly doesn't disappoint. We see 9 initial options that are split into 3 different categories, with 3 options within each. 1. Guide selection. These determine what guides are selected to influence where the hair grows. For instance, the circle option will grow hair around the center position of a guide. 2. Guide interpolation. This controls how hairs are generated between each guide. 3. Guide count. This controls the average distribution of hair between the number of close-by guides. By selecting different combinations of these 9, you will find a combination that best suits the style you're aiming for. In other settings for the hair from guides, you have all the settings you have within Cinema 4D's own hair settings, plus the ability to apply a displacement map. This displacement map will take into account the displacement that happens at render time. Within Cinema 4D, you may have sculpted a character in which deforms around the head or the brow area, but typically when you go to render, you'll find the hairs are too far embedded within the mesh. This is because it had not taken into account the displacement. Ornatrix, with the ability to add a displacement map, will take these things into account. The last default operator in this default stack is the change width. This is what it suggests. It lets you set the hair's thickness. Its location within the stack is convenient as it's found right here with the other operators. But Cinema 4D's own hair system requires you to open the hair material to access this setting. In fact, for all basic operators that you need to add to the stack for Ornatrix, you can only activate within Cinema 4D's own hair system from the hair material in its own floating palette. When looking at collisions during grooming with Cinema 4D's native hair system, you need to add a collision tag and turn the collisions on from the brush in use. If the collisions tolerance settings are set too low, you will get very odd results. With Ornatrix there is an auto setting for that is real time according to the offset amount, but you also have a button that pushes the guides away from the mesh with your own chosen offset. This produces very good results without messing up your style just from a single click. In addition to the feature added to the hair from guides operator, there is a dedicated operator called push away from surface. This can be applied to both the guides or the hair generated, with multiple mesh objects taken into account. Cinema 4D's own hair system does not have this option to include other objects for collisions, such as clothing. In the Edit Guides operator, we have the option to add strand groups and channels. Strand groups are like assigning selection sets within Cinema 4D's own hair system. Cinema 4D's own methods are that the selection sets are added to the hair object, in which you can then give each selection set a meaningful name. For Ornatrix, you have to go through a slightly longer procedure by first selecting the Edit Guides operator, go to the Groups tab, or scroll down to the Groups options should multiple tabs be highlighted, of which I recommend both Object and Strand Group tabs are selected. You now need to choose one of the 2 selection modes, either Roots or Tips. Roots is the one for this particular job. You need to turn on Ignore Backface selections, which is off by default, and then select the guides. Moving to the Groups options, you will need to turn Strand Groups on, then press the Assign Unique button. Doing this assigns the selected guides to a unique number starting at 1. You can't give it any meaningful name, but there is a good reason for this. The reason behind this unique number is because it opens up a whole new level of control regarding other operators. Using the Select by Group option, you can use the selection brush to select any guide within a group, and all the guides for that group will be selected. This is a welcome option and speeds up the group selection process greatly. For instance, to select the side hair group, choose the select brush and select any guide from that side, and it will highlight all those guides ready for direct manipulation, using the select only option for all the brushes. You also have channels, only these channels have a different function to groups. Channels work off the basis of vertex value data rather than the selection for a whole guide. It goes without saying that the groups and channels open up a whole new level of control over the groom, in which Cinema 4D's own hair system just simply can't compete with. Groups are not there just to select groups of guides, but also serve the purpose within other operators as a means to isolate that operated effect. You may, for instance, wish to only apply a clump to the fringe of the hair, or maybe you have two groups, one for each side of the hair, so you can assign both groups to that operator. This is where it makes sense to have groups as numbers rather than names, as it's by the number that the operator group is identified and inputted. The channels are dedicated for use within operators and can be made for either guides or the vertex levels. Channels work on the basis of values between 0 black and 1 white. No texture maps are required. This information is stored within Ornatrix. You can assign to a selection of guides a single value, or you can paint the guide's vertex points with different values, say from root to tip. In this example, let's say you added a frizz operator and used groups to only affect both sides of the hair. I may wish to only affect the tips of the hair, and by means of the channels I can do just that. Not only can you apply this in that particular order, but you can paint the channels after they're added to the operator and see the results in real time. As you look at all the different operators, you'll see many options to choose either groups or channels to control the different aspects of that operator. Going back to Cinema 4D's own hair system, the only way to get similar results is to have multiple hair objects in order to use multiple materials which control which is the equivalent to Ornatrix's single stack system. This would still not produce the same results, especially as in version 2 of Ornatrix. You now have the ability to blend between groups, providing a more natural look between these groups using different operators. Clumping, just like frizz, are two of the most often used features for any hair system, and clumping within Cinema 4D's own hair system is somewhat confusing and unpredictable. Ornatrix not only makes this a simple affair, but adds many options that refines the whole clumping process. This area really does show Cinema 4D's own hair system needs to be revamped, and it is now showing its age. Looking at the clumping a little bit more deeper, you can discover that you can actually clump either the guides or the hair, or both. This means that you can apply clumping to the guides. That's more handy if you have multiple guides, or you can apply the clumping by applying it to the hair after the hair has been generated, which is the hair from guides operator. Whichever one you choose, you have the same control. In this particular case, I've placed the clump after the hair from guides, so now the clump is affecting the hair directly rather than the guides. From this you can choose the different type of clumping that you want to happen. So as an example here, you can choose the clump amount, and then you click on the create clumps. What will happen is 36 clump counts will be created from this selection of the hair. If I was to bump this up to say 60 and press the clump button again, you'll see that there's more clumps for that particular selection of hair. You've also got the option to select and delete particular clumps that you may not like. So as an example here, we can select some clumps down here. You'll notice as I'm going over this area here, it's actually selecting complete clumps of hair. You can then go and click on the delete clump, and now the clumps have been removed from that particular patch of hair. Remember, this also works when you're applying the clumping to the guides. Separate from the clump hair editing, you've actually got clump editing. This is a little bit different. This works on the basis of each clump that's been generated. In this particular case, there's actually 60. What you can do from this is you can select individual clumps or multiple clumps and choose how the settings are going to be affected for that particular clump. You'll notice that when I selected a clump, it opens up the options down here. These options allow you to apply independent settings for that particular clump rather than the whole clump for every single clump that's on the hair. These settings include the amount ramp, so how much clump is going to be applied in that particular area that's been influenced by that clump. You can control the amount of twist that clump is affecting for that particular hair. And this is separate from the global settings that's found in here. So for instance, you can see here we have the amount ramp, and we also have the twist ramp, and you can see the amount of twist in degrees. So this is globally how it's going to be affected over the whole entire hair, whereas when you do this inside the clump for a particular selected clump, this will override the global settings and apply it just to that particular clump. As you can see here, I've got these two clumps selected, and that's influencing this whole area here. If I was to start Redshift IPR, you'll see this area being clumped. But because I've got this clumped selected, what I can do is I can now apply the amount that's applied to this particular area. We turn it from 100% down to 0. And remember that this amount here is only applying to these particular selected guides. This gives you immense control over your groom. You could apply an overall clump over the hair and find that there's some areas that just doesn't look right, and you can choose to use these per clump values to change the amount, the ramp amount between the root and tip, and how it twists on a per clump basis. To illustrate this on a more simple object, I've selected a plane and I've applied the Ornatrix hair. What you can see right now is I've applied a clump operator after the hair from guides. This means that the clumps are being applied directly to the hair. If I put the clump operator before the hair from guides, it means the clump's now going to be applied directly to the guides themselves. You can have either one or the other or both. For now I'm going to stick to leaving it for the edit guide so I can show you what we can do with this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this button which says Clump Hair Editing, and it will allow us to select the guides in which is actually being clumped. From this I can choose to create more or less clumps. So in this particular case I'm going to select one and click on this Create Clump button again. You'll notice now that all those selected guides have been clumped together as one clump. If I wanted to and I had enough guides, I could actually take this clump amount right up, and now it's created, if it can, 29 different clumps. This is very handy if you've got a particular area on your groom that you want to have, say, some dreadlocks or a ponytail, when you want to assign particular guides for that area. What you can do is you can select that area, select clump count to 1, and then generate. If I was to move the clump to the hair from guides, it's now going to be applied directly to the hair. And this is where it's going to be more obvious, because obviously there is more hair generated than there is actually guides. Now when you're creating a clump, you've actually got multiple options here. You've got random, which indicates that it's actually random. You can actually create clumps from groups that you've selected. So if you created some groups on a particular hairstyle, say for instance a group where there was say the fringe or the sides or the back, you could actually create clumps based on groups. You can also create clumps based off the guides, even though it's been applied directly to the hairs. This means that if you've got 50 guides, it's going to create 50 clumps. The more guides you got, the more clumps it's going to create in this particular mode. For the external clump strands, this opens up a completely different option, and this allows you to select external guides. This could be something that you've bought in from another application. In addition to this, you can actually apply this clump pattern, and this opens up the ability to use the braiding system within Ornatrix. When we apply clumps directly to the hair, we've got other options. For instance, we've got clump editing. What we can do when we click on this is select clumps, and we can choose to delete them, or we can choose to have independent control over these particular areas, as I've showed you on the groom. Only in this particular case it may look more obvious. So for instance, we've got this amount. As you can see, when I adjust this, it's applying the amount of clumping to that particular area rather than globally. You can also choose how it's affected between the roots and the tips. This also applies for twisting. This means that if we have this affected in this particular area, we go back to the global options in here. You can see the twisting has been applied to everywhere else but what's been overridden. Same with the amount. So we go to the amount. You can see that the amount is applied to everywhere else other than the designated area that we've chosen to do the clump editing. This gives us an enormous amount of control, remembering that this is just one clump operator. you can add multiple clump operators. And this then opens up something else entirely different, something that unless you've actually used Ornatrix, you come to realize that you do actually need multiple clumps for realistic looking hair. In this simple example, you can see I've applied 24 clumps. This could make up different bangs of hair as an overall volume. But what if you want these clumps to then be clumped again into smaller clumps while retaining the initial volume that we've got right here? Well, this is done by selecting the clump. You go to the Object tab and you go to the bottom here, and you've got this feature here called Region Channel. If you were to open up this is for sub-clumping, and because this is the first main clump, we have to click on this Add Clump Index Channel, and what this will do is it will actually create a special channel for this clump. Now when we add an additional clump on top of this, we can rename this second, primary. When we go to the second clump, what we will do in the same option is we will actually select this region channel, and you'll notice in here it says Clumpids. Now by selecting this channel, what it's going to do is it's going to take into account that it's actually a clump before itself. So providing we create more clumps than we did originally, remembering it was 24, let's take this up to say 45. And then we click on the Create Clumps. What you'll notice will happen is we've actually got additional clumps within the clumps. So this is really powerful for us to have this feature, because by using this you're going to be able to split your clumps into multiple clumps by keeping the original volume that was there. You can see here that without this is what it would look like. Let's up this value considerably higher. You can see it's much more individual clumps here, but I'm going to turn on the primary clump, and you can see that it still tried to keep some of that volume from the primary clump while simultaneously splitting it up into additional clumps from the secondary. So we've actually got 156 clumps that have broken down the initial 24 clumps that we've set. You can then add a next level of clumps. So for instance, we can go to the object, we can click on Add Clump Index Channel, we can create another clump channel, and then from this clump channel we can go to the region channel, and you'll see another channel there which says Clumpids 1. Now providing that we create more clumps than we did the last one was set to 156, let's say we're going to put this to 246, create clumps, and now what it's done is actually split the clumps that were from the second one, and the second one is taking it from the first one. This means the result is that we've lost no clumps from the settings that we've had from the individual clumps, while at the same time we've actually broken those clumps into more refined clumps. The result of this is a much more natural hair look. Rather than having massive bangs of hair, we can have massive bangs of hair with multiple clumps within those bangs of hair, and even multiple clumps within those multiple clumps. As you can see, it's very powerful, and more than that, the results actually produce very realistic looking hair. This is part one of a two-part preview, and I'll split it up like this so that you can watch one at a time, because it's going to be rather lengthy as a one continuous video. The reason I did this is because I wanted to give Ornatrix a proper review and preview for you so that you can really see the differences, and in order to do this it means it's going to take longer, but I'm sure that you appreciate to be able to see in more detail exactly what the differences are and just how powerful Ornatrix is. In part 2 I'm going to continue on from where we are from part 1, and I'm going to delve into more of the details of Ornatrix so that we can see exactly where it differs from the Cinema 4D's own hair system, and where we can see the clear differences in the results as well.